Imagine standing outside a burning city in the year 1200 BC. The harbor is empty, the palace stores are running low. Refugees are moving along the road, enemy ships have been seen near the coast, and somebody turns to you and says, "Our age of bronze is collapsing." That would be an astonishingly intelligent thing to say, mostly because the phrase Bronze Age collapse would not exist for another 3,000 years. The people living through it did not know they were Bronze Age people. They did not divide history into neat blocks called bronze, iron, classical, and medieval. They did not know that archaeologists would one day name their century, examine their burned buildings, and argue about why their world disappeared. But they did know something was wrong. Ships stopped arriving. Grain became harder to find. Messages asking for help went unanswered. Palaces that had stood for generations burned. Kingdoms whose names had frightened their neighbors simply stopped writing things down. So did ancient people know their civilization was collapsing? The answer is both no and yes. They could not see the historical period ending, but they could see their world becoming smaller, poorer, and more dangerous one broken connection at a time. To understand what that felt like, forget the popular image of the ancient Mediterranean as scattered villages that rarely spoke to one another. The late Bronze Age was surprisingly connected. Around 1300 BC, powerful kingdoms surrounded the eastern Mediterranean. Egypt controlled enormous wealth. The Hittite Empire ruled much of Anatolia. Mycenaean palace states dominated parts of Greece. The cities of the Levant linked inland kingdoms to the sea. Cyprus supplied huge amounts of copper. Kings exchanged gifts, married into foreign royal families, sent diplomatic letters, complained about the quality of presents, and addressed other great kings as brother. Cargo ships carried copper, tin, glass, pottery, ivory, resin, food, weapons, jewelry, and luxury goods across the sea. One ship that sank near Uluburun, off the coast of modern Turkey, was carrying roughly 10 tons of copper ingots, about a ton of tin, and goods connected to an extraordinary range of places. That cargo reveals the strength of the system. It also reveals the weakness. Bronze is mostly copper mixed with tin. Copper was available in places such as Cyprus. Tin was much harder to obtain and often traveled over very long distances. A local smith could know exactly how to make a bronze sword and still be unable to make one if distant mines, merchants, ports, ships, officials, and guards failed to do their jobs. This was an ancient supply chain. And like a modern supply chain, it worked beautifully until several important parts failed together. Now imagine you are not a king. You are a metalworker in a coastal city for years. Ships arrive carrying ingots, officials collect material for the palace. You receive metal, fuel, food, and instructions. You make tools, fittings, spearheads, or ornaments. The system feels permanent because it existed before you were born. Then one shipment is late. That is irritating, but not a collapse. Then another ship does not arrive. Tin becomes expensive. The palace gives you less material. A merchant says the sea is unsafe. A guard says raiders attacked another port. Someone else claims the king has sent troops away. Nothing has officially ended. You simply have less work than last year. This is how collapse often enters ordinary life, not as a historian announcing the end of an age, but as a collection of temporary problems that stop being temporary. The surviving letters from the final years of Ugarit make this feeling unusually vivid. Ugarit was a wealthy port kingdom on the coast of what is now Syria. Its scribes wrote on clay tablets, which is fortunate for us because clay can survive the destruction of the people who wrote on it. In one famous message, the king of Ugarit reports that enemy ships have arrived and damaged his land, while his own troops and ships are away. Another letter warns that enemy ships have been seen at sea, and urges vigilance. These were not people calmly recording a completed historical event. They were still inside it. They were sending information, asking questions, moving soldiers, and hoping the system would recover. Then Ugarit was destroyed. Its last messages survived in the ruins. That sounds like proof that everyone knew the end was coming. But be careful. People in danger usually know they are in danger. That does not mean they understand the full size of the crisis. A scribe in Ugarit could know that ships threatened his coast. He could not open a map showing destruction across Greece, Anatolia, Cyprus, and the Levant. He had no satellite images, international news, archaeological chronology, or economic data. He could see his piece of the network failing. He could not see the entire network from above. And the entire network did not fail in one simple way. For a long time, people wanted one villain for the Bronze Age collapse. The most famous suspects are the Sea Peoples, groups named in Egyptian inscriptions who attacked parts of the eastern Mediterranean during the reigns of Merneptah and Ramesses III. They are perfect historical villains because they arrive from the sea, have mysterious names, and appear near the moment several civilizations fall. But the sea people's destroyed civilization is too clean. Some cities were attacked, some were abandoned, some declined gradually, some were rebuilt. Some regions survived or adapted. Egypt fought off invasions but emerged weaker. Parts of the former Hittite world continued as smaller successor states. Even the people moving by sea may not all have been one organized invading army. Some could have been raiders. Some could have been mercenaries. Some may have been displaced families moving because their own homes were already failing. The people blamed for the collapse may also have been people running from it. Climate added pressure. Evidence from tree rings and other environmental records indicates severe dry conditions around the end of the Hittite Empire. One recent tree ring study identified an unusually severe multi-year drought around 1198 to 1196 BC, allowing for dating uncertainty. Ancient texts from the wider period also mention grain shortages, famine, and high grain prices. But drought is not a magic answer either. A dry year does not automatically erase an empire. Communities can store grain, change crops, move animals, import food, or ask allies for help. Unless the allies are also hungry. Unless the roads are unsafe. Unless ships are being attacked. Unless the palace has collected too much wealth in one place, and ordinary farmers no longer trust it. Unless soldiers are rebelling, rulers are fighting, and displaced people are arriving at the border. The danger was not one disaster. It was several disasters removing the solutions to one another. Trade could soften a local famine until trade failed. The army could protect trade until the state could not feed the army. The palace could distribute stored grain until the palace burned. Writing could coordinate the response until the scribes, administrators, and institutions that used it disappeared. This is why many researchers now describe the collapse as a complex transformation, rather than one synchronized explosion. For the people inside it, however, transformation could still mean terror. Imagine a farming family living near a palace center in Greece. The palace is not just a rich person's house. It organizes land, labor, storage, craft production, religion, and military power. Scribes record goods and obligations on clay tablets, using a script we call linear B. You do not need to read those tablets. The palace's decisions still reach into your field. Then the palace is destroyed. At first, that might even feel like freedom. No official arrives to collect the same tribute. No administrator counts your animals. No elite demands your labor. But the palace also connected specialists, stored food, organized defense, and moved goods across long distances. When it disappears, the tax collector may vanish. So does the protection, the market, the record keeper, and the person who can order hundreds of workers to repair a wall. Some people lose power, other people lose the system that made their skills useful. A palace scribe is important while there is a palace. Afterward, he is a man who can write inventory records for an administration that no longer exists. In parts of Greece, linear B writing disappeared with the palace system. Writing did not return there for centuries, and when it did, people used a different script. Think about that silence. The people did not disappear completely. They continued farming, building, trading, fighting, marrying, raising children, and telling stories. But the institutions that had written their world down were gone. History becomes quieter, not because nothing is happening, but because fewer people are recording it in a form that survives. This creates a strange problem when we ask what ancient people knew. The people most able to describe the crisis belong to the institutions being destroyed by it. The final palace archive does not contain a historian's conclusion. It contains unfinished administration, lists, orders, deliveries, warnings, messages. The paperwork of people who expected there would still be worked tomorrow. So when did an ordinary person realize the old world was not coming back? Probably not when the first ship was late. Probably not after the first failed harvest, the first raid, or the first rumor from another city. Humans are extremely good at treating structural change as a temporary emergency. The rains will return next year. The king will send soldiers. The merchants will come in spring. The palace will be rebuilt. The refugees will go home. And sometimes those beliefs are reasonable. Ancient cities had survived droughts, wars, earthquakes, succession crises, and raids before. You do not abandon your house every time something goes wrong. Collapse becomes visible only after enough familiar things fail to return. The road grows over. The harbor stays empty. The ruined gate becomes a place where children play. The old storage rooms are used for something else. The person who remembers how the palace worked becomes an old person. Then a story. Then nobody buy. At that point, you may no longer say, "Our civilization is collapsing." You may simply say, "This is how life is now." And that is the most important answer. Ancient people experienced collapse at different speeds. For a king whose capital was burning, it could happen in one night. For a merchant, it might be 5 years of fewer ships and more dangerous routes. For a farmer in a region that adapted successfully, the famous Bronze Age collapse might feel less like the end of the world and more like a change in rulers, markets, and obligations. For a child born afterward, there was no collapse at all. There was only the world adults gave them. This is why the phrase Bronze Age collapse is useful, but deceptive. It makes history look like a building falling straight down. In reality, parts of the building burned, parts were abandoned, parts were rebuilt with cheaper materials, and people carried useful pieces away to construct something new. Iron technology eventually became more common. New kingdoms emerged, trade networks reorganized, communities adapted. The Eastern Mediterranean did not become empty. An age ended, but human life continued untidily through the ending. So did ancient people know the Bronze Age was collapsing. Numbers, they did not know it was the Bronze Age. They did not know future textbooks would group their separate wars, shortages, migrations, destroyed cities, and political failures into one famous event. But they knew when food cost more. They knew when the ships stopped. They knew when strangers appeared on the road. They knew when the king's message sounded frightened. They knew when the palace that was supposed to last forever became smoke. People rarely experience history with the chapter title visible above them. They experience prices, rumors, empty shelves, unanswered letters, broken roads, and plans that keep being postponed. Only later does someone draw a line through time and give the line a name. The people of 1200 BC never said, "Our age of bronze is collapsing." They said there was no grain. They said the enemy ships were here. They said help had not arrived. And eventually, they stopped waiting for the old world to return.